question 2 will always be that initialization question, which involves, remember, the following. And you know, have your checklist. Write down your checklist when you're writing this code. Number 1, you need to figure out what the dimensions are. And so that boils down to you having identified what the dimensions should have been in question 1. But if you weren't sure, then it will tell you here in your mark sheet, first and foremost, and secondly in the question itself. So if you read through question 2, it says the application must be able to handle any number of sport teams. So that's number 1, one dimension, sport teams, and any number of athletes per sport team, number 2. And then typically in the many semester test questions you've gone through, you would say, well, hang on, there's normally three dimensions. Why are there not 3 dimensions here? This is not to say there aren't 3 dimensions, because if we go to our code from yesterday, you'll recall that we do have 3 dimensions. We have one for N medals, one for N athletes, and one for N teams. Yet in our question here, there's only 2 dimensions. But this is the uniqueness of this particular question. Okay, and that's why we're saying that regardless of what the problem is on Friday, it boils down to you reading the question very carefully. So for now, you're just thinking, okay, fine, there's really only 2 dimensions in this particular question, although when I did question 1, I established that there would be 3. Okay, but that's not the end of the world. Then it says that these numbers are specified by the user at the beginning, and each team will have the same number of athletes. Okay, and so 2.1, it says input the number of teams and athletes. Then number 2.2, set up your dynamic arrays. 2.3, set up your UJ grid control, and then 2.4 is labeling your UJ grid controls. So you can see that 2.1 up to 2.4's mark sheet gives you an indication of what it is that you have to do in question 2. Okay, so keeping that in mind, we're now going to question 2. And since yesterday, what I've done is I've made my interface pretty. So you can see there are all the buttons I require. There is my UJ grid. And then I'm just going to pause here. T. Cutler is asking, let me just read through this. Hello, Prof. I see that today you have used an input box instead of a text box. Are there any advantages of using a text box over an input box? Well, Mr. LeBure seems to be a fan of using input boxes over text boxes. And the benefit there of using input boxes over text boxes is that you don't have to, in your text box, so in your toolbox, typically you would have to drag and drop the controls onto your form. So that means that if you want to use text boxes, you would have to drag 3 text boxes onto your form. Then you would also have to drag 3 labels onto your form. And then remember, you have to set the text of the 3 labels as well. In this example, the text of the 2 labels as well as the name of the 2 text boxes. So the benefit of an input box is that in terms of implementation, it might be faster for you to not have to drag and drop the labels as well as the text box control. However, if for me personally, what I like doing is I do like using the text boxes and the labels, because then when I set up my program, I can then enter the values, and when I press the button, I can keep track in my mind what am I looking at. Are these 2, 3, 2 dimensions or so on. So in terms of implementation, this is really a personal preference, but if you feel that for you, dragging and dropping the controls onto your form takes a fair amount of time, then perhaps use input boxes. But if you feel that, this is really quick for you, you can do it very quickly, then feel free to use the text boxes and labels on your own. Okay, so hopefully that's answered your question. Mr. Labia, I don't know if you've got any additional comments regarding the debate over input boxes versus text boxes.
No, not particularly. It just goes down to preference, as you said, and which you prefer doing better. Recently, when I've been doing the tutorials, I've been using text boxes because, as you say, it's easier for you to see what are you working with the information put there for you, that it's a 232 or a 21, whatever, and you can see the dimensions there. So I think that's a better way of doing it. But in terms of time, yes, an input box is better.
Okay, so hopefully we've answered your question very sufficiently, but I'm glad you asked this question because it is something that many other people probably are thinking as well. And the reason why I've opted to use an input box today is to show you that, hey, you know what, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're still going to get marks, whether you use input boxes or text boxes. The only problem is sometimes we pick up that people who don't attend these lectures and they think they can do everything on their own and don't really, what they do is they use input boxes as well as text boxes, and if you do that, then we're going to end up taking marks off, because now what are you trying to do? Because if I have text boxes in here, I'm going to be tempted to put the values into the text box, and then when I press the initialize button, suddenly you have input boxes that pop up and say, what are those dimensions? And I thought, well, I've given it to you. I typed it out in the text boxes. You're asking me this question again, this information again. And that normally agitates, well, it agitates me personally, and I will be very tempted to take off marks as a result. And I believe my assistants will do the same, because it just makes no logical sense in terms of your user interface. All right. So I am going to go to my question 2 button now, and I'm going to write the code which is going to answer all 4 of these things. So I'm going to do that in the order that I've got here. And the reason why I would do that is because it would make it easier for, well, your marker to mark this. So I will now start by maybe putting 2.1, just to indicate that this is where the 2.1 code should be. And if I were being marked, then I can, it's like in your grade 12 exams. When you answer your questions, obviously you number each and every single one of your questions, so that when the marker has to mark it, they know that this code is exactly for 2.1, and then they can say, well, for 2.1, I'm looking for 2 marks. There is 2.1. Where is the code? This is the code exactly. I can give you 2 out of 2. As opposed to, you go, here is some of 2.1. If you scroll further down, maybe you will see 2.1 somewhere else as well. Don't make us look for your code. Okay, so as we said, in teams is going to equal to, and because I'm using an input box, I must remember to use a cint, and I would say how many teams are there. Okay, and the idea is, please remember, when you type these things out, try to be descriptive, in the sense that if I were in this program for the first time, I'd at least know what your program is asking me. Because remember, you wrote the program, but the problem is who's using your program. Okay, because whoever's using your program needs to understand how to use it properly, so that when they use it, when they enter the test data and they enter it correctly, then your program is going to provide the correct output, and then we can all be happy, because we can say, well, your program works, the output is correct, and so we are more happy to then say, well, here are the marks, as opposed to, this doesn't work, now I'm agitated, I've got to restart the program because I couldn't follow your instructions that you gave me correctly. Okay, so then the next thing is the N athletes, and that is equal to, again, cint input box, and then how many athletes are there. And you know what, if you spell something incorrectly, we're not going to, well, Mr. Libya and I are not going to be grammar Nazis during the marking of semester tests. We might go, oh, someone couldn't spell athlete or something, but that's still okay. But just please don't write, don't spell so horrendously that it's like, how many A's? I'm like, what's an A? All right. And then the last thing is, technically, 2.1, we have answered the question, because we have read in the number of teams and we have read in the number of athletes. The only thing we haven't read in is the number of medals. But the reason why we don't read in the number of medals is because there's no need to ask in how many medals there are, because there are 3 different types of medals, if you remember the question carefully, because it is for gold, silver, and bronze. And so yesterday, the question was, one of the students commented that, well, then you would declare N medals equal to 3. And yes, you are absolutely welcome to do that. Now, you could, in theory, go to form load, all right? Because when your form loads, you want the following code to be executed. All right, so technically you could do this. You could say when the form loads, I am going to make n medals equal to 3. All right, that's one possibility. But because I am busy with 2.1 and 2.1 involves me getting the dimensions, another place where you could technically specify that n medals is equal to 3 is over here. So you could technically do that. And the idea is, ladies and gentlemen, you specify it as 3 because you know it will always be 3. If you type in cint input box, how many types of metals are there in this line, then you're going to lose marks because you shouldn't have to ask the user how many different types of metals there are. Everyone knows there are 3 types of metals. You get gold, silver, or bronze, period. Okay, so either your choice is either you specify it in form load. So when the form loads up, you already specify in metal equal to the value 3. That is one way of doing it. Or you can do it during the initialize while you're busy getting the dimension. So I'm going to opt to do that instead. And so there are my 3 dimensions all set up. And now I can move on to 2.2, which is setting up your dynamic arrays. And even though 3 in metals is technically a fixed size value, we established yesterday that we cannot specify 3 there because there is an error. So we would have to resize how many arrays? We would have to resize the metals array, which is inside every athlete. And then because there are a number of athletes on every team, we'd have to resize metals, athletes, and lastly, we would have to resize sports. But when we're resizing arrays, remember, we must do it from outermost array to innermost array. And so in my 2.2, I'm going to then now declare for, and I'm going to have t as integer is equal to 1 to n teams. All right, and that will be for every single team I've got. Now every single team, remember, has an athletes array. So that's why I need to have a for t loop to go through every single team and set the athletes array. But inside every single athlete, I also have to have a medals array. That is why over here, I'm going to have for m as integer, not m, for every a as integer is equal to 1 to n athletes, and then I have a next a. But now the question is, where do I put the read commands? Okay, and this is one of the common places where people make a mistake. What Mr. Lebia and I often see is that we notice the following. We see read sports to n teams, and then inside the athletes we see read sports, if we're lucky, dot athletes to n athletes, right? And then we see a third for loop, which then tries to read a third for loop which goes through every single medal, and then we see, okay, so I'll type that out as well here, just to see, so that everyone can see what not to do. Right, and then they go read sports T, athletes A, dot, and then medals, and then over here we go in medals. Or you could actually use the value 3. Now, what will actually happen here? Will you, so the question I actually should ask all of you is, looking at this code right now, will you get the correct number of, will the correct amount of memory be allocated to all my arrays? And Mr. Lebia, maybe you could quickly set up a poll. So, ladies and gentlemen, just study this code quickly while Mr. Lebia sets up a poll. How many of you reckon that this will allocate the correct amount of memory? And how many of you think it will not allocate the correct amount of memory? Now, we all know that this code is incorrect. Hopefully you see that. But my question, the more important question here is, who thinks this will still work, and who thinks that this will absolutely, this program is going to crash? Okay, so just study this, and Mr. Labier's got his poll up. So please do participate. Please don't not participate. I know some of you are very shy, but the idea is please answer the question and see what's going on. And hopefully you're not saying that this is wrong because I've told you it is wrong. Hopefully you know it's wrong because you've done enough of these. This is incorrect. This shouldn't be how it's done. All right. So of the 22 people that are in the room, we see that there are 3 people so far who are saying yes and 12 people saying no. And please, the idea right now is don't be shy, okay, to try and answer this question. At the end of the day, it boils down to you knowing why you don't do certain things. Okay, so the majority of the people reckon that this isn't going to work. A minority said no, but there are 9 people who have decided that they don't want to respond. Ladies and gentlemen, please do try to respond. Unless you really cannot get to the poll and you are not able to answer this, please do give it a try. I mean, analyze this code. If you're not sure, it's okay. Just study this, because remember, in the semester test, yes, ST Mashlangu, you want to speak up and ask your question or give a comment. Sure. Go ahead.
Prof, can I ask something? The n medals equals to 3. Can I exclude it and include it in the for loops and just say for m as integer is equals to 1 to 3 instead of saying n medals is equals to 3?
You could do that, but what I've specified earlier on is on line 27, I've specified n medals to 3. And the reason why we want to do this is I know that right now in the real world, everyone says there's only 3 types of medals. But for good programming practice-wise, you want to write code so that you can change the code easily. So if you hard code it, this is what we call hard coding. If we change the n medals to 3 there, right? That means that, let's say tomorrow the Olympics decides, you know what, there's going to be 4 types of medals. There's going to be gold, there's going to be platinum, gold, silver, and bronze. Then you're going to have to go through your code, and everywhere where you've got 3, you're going to have to change that 3 to a 4 now. Whereas if we've done it as n medals, then there's only one place in this entire code which you have to change, and that is on line 27. So regardless of whether there's 4 medals or 5 medals or suddenly only 2 medals, you just have to change one location, and this is considered to be good programming practice. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, but please try and answer this question here. That is the more important thing. Ooh, there's a minority. Okay, MHT Gwala, you have a question?
Since you're saying that if the medals had to change to 4, why can't we just make it that the amount of medals are inputted by the user? So in the case that it changes, instead of going to the code and changing it, the user just adds more.
Not following you. So the idea is if we do change it to 4, so the way we've written the code at the moment, right, is that we are using a variable called n medals. If we had changed this to 3, so let's say we don't use n medals, right? We want to use 3 at the moment. So that means that everywhere we have to use 3. So that would be 3, that would be 3. Everywhere else where there's a for loop, we'd have to use 3. Now, how many locations is it? There's more than one location. So if, say, tomorrow we go, no, it's not 3 medals anymore, it's 4 medals, then I would have to go, yeah?
What I'm saying is, right, Since you're saying that if that's changed the middle, I'm saying why doesn't the user input, like an input box for n teams, why doesn't the user input the amount of medals that are required, so that in case that there is a change, then you don't have to actually go change the actual code, because then it'll be a dynamic.
Okay,
It'll just
right.
be dimmed to the number of medals.
Okay, and the reason for that is at the moment right now, the standard is 3. So that's like asking you, imagine if you ran this program every day, and every day I ask you how many teams are there, how many athletes are there, how many medals are there, and you're like, duh, it's obvious, it's always 3 medals. It's always 3 medals, and maybe for now it's always 3 medals. So there are certain situations where certain values are, it's always the same at the moment. And so the idea here is, by making this n medals equal to 3, we are saving our user the one less thing that they have to specify for now, if I can put it that way. And so this really is about, let's make the lives of our user more convenient by limiting how much data they have to put in each time. And so because n medals is normally 3, basically all the time, let's keep that at 3. But we are doing it we're using a variable so that in the event that maybe the value changes at some point, we can easily change it. So an example of this, and I think this is a very good example, is what is the VAT rate in South Africa right now? Who can tell me? It's 15%, isn't it? It's 15. But was it always 15%?
No, it was 14.
Yeah, it was 14 at some point in time. But you notice that if I ask you today or for the rest of the year, what are the chances that the VAT is going to change? It's not going to really change, is it? But it could. As an argument, it could technically change. It depends on whether the government decides they need to push it up or down. And so in a normal day-to-day basis, it doesn't change. And so let's program it in, but let's program it in such a way that people will be able to change the code as necessary. And so you as the programmer, if the VAT changes to 16% next month, you just have to go back to your code and say, look, I mean, it's not something that changes every week or every day, so then let's make it 16% going forward. Does that hopefully make sense to you?
Yeah, okay, no, thank you.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So I'm seeing that now we've lost someone from the yes camp. There's 10 people who still are not going to answer this question. And, ladies and gentlemen, when you write your semester test on Friday, it's not going to be a choice for you anymore. You're going to have to make a decision. So what I will do is, the majority are saying no, and there's 2 people who are saying yes, but they're feeling, I think they're feeling a little discouraged that they're a minority. But please, let's not change your values anymore. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. And so the poll is, at the moment, I've stopped it now. The poll is 16 say no, 2 say yes, and 9 don't know what to say. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this code as is right now, and I am going to continue writing the rest of the code, and we're going to run the program and see whether or not the people who said no are actually correct. Okay, but for those of you who are writing the code out on paper, obviously now is not the time to go, oh, should I try and figure out whether this is going to work or not? This is why we are making this mistake now, to show you whether this is an issue. All right, so 2.2, technically our memory is allocated. What else must we do? We must set up the UJ grid control, and then we must label the UJ grid control headings. And please note this question, this comment is very important. This is basically dictating to you which are going to be your rows and which one are going to be your columns. And this, please follow. Don't go, oh no, that's a suggestion, I don't like that, I'm going to swap it around. Do what we tell you to do. All right. So to set up the UJ grid, obviously you need to know how many rows and how many columns. Now, how we figure out how many rows and how many columns there are, well, remember that if you had done your design properly, you would know. But since we didn't do our design because we're naughty today, we are going to have to calculate based on our buttons in our form. Obviously, this depends on whether your form actually is correct or not. So when you input the data, you're not displaying anything. Please note that. When you input data, do not display anything. The question does not tell you to display. Do not display. Then it says calculate the medal scores per athlete per team, and that normally is across multiple rows, multiple columns, so that it doesn't count. Then it says the best athlete per team, and because it's per team, and you know teams are rows, that means that your best athlete plus per team is plus one additional column. Then you'll calculate team scores, that's another additional column, and then calculate team ratings, that's another column. So how many additional columns are we looking at? 1, 2, 3. So in other words, going back here, the number of rows, there's no additional rows technically, so grdta.rows is equal to n teams plus 1, and grdta.cols is equal to n athletes plus, and because we said it's plus 3, but then we need an additional column for the heading, it will be plus 4. All right. Do you see how we go plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus a heading for 4? That is all we need to do to receive the 2 marks for setting up the UJ grid. Okay, so it's an easy 2 marks. Next, we're going to do the labeling, and the labeling we are going to have to do for T as integer is equal to 1 to n teams again, and now we're going to say display, and what I have done is I have written my display subroutine yesterday afternoon already. Remember, you must write your own subroutine. Well, okay, display, and we say T because it's row T, column 0, and we say team ampersand C string T, and then you need for A as integer is equal to 1 to n athletes, XA, and display, and over here it is row 0, column A, and athlete ampersand C string A. Right, so that is to display those, and then we have the additional 3 columns, so it's n athletes plus 1, and there we have to display, let's see, the best athlete per team, the team score, as well as the team rating. So we go best athlete, and then over here, I shouldn't really be doing this. You should not be copying and pasting, but we know it's plus 2 and we know it's plus 3. And then here, this was supposed to be team score, and this one is team rating. All right. Please note, try not to copy and paste like I have. That was very naughty of me. If we were to run this program now, will we, if there were any glaring issues with resizing the array, we can pick it up here. So we could technically run the program and test this at this point. So let's do that. We initialize, and remember, use different dimensions. So I'm going to go 2, 3, and then remember the medals we don't get asked because it's 3 already. And you can see that the program didn't crash. In fact, it specified there were 2 teams, there's 3 athletes on each team, and it specifies the best athlete, team score, and the team rating. So everything seems okay so far. When I input data, the first thing is, what is the name of sport team 1? And please, you know, when you're running this test data, please don't come up with beautiful names and so on. It's a string. A is good enough. So, look, my program crashed already. Okay, and remember that when you allocate your memory incorrectly, your most common error will say system null reference exception. Okay, your null reference exception is basically telling you, hey, you resize your arrays incorrectly. And it goes object reference not set to an instance of an object. And you're thinking, well, I'm sure I did it correctly. Why is it complaining? Now, it's important that you see where is it complaining. So it managed to get through your sports team fine. It didn't have an issue there. But it is complaining here under when you enter the athletes array. So put your mouse over your variable, all right, sports, and you'll see that sports says sports T. Draw your mouse and you can see that athletes is nothing. Can you see? This is very important. Are you all picking this up? You put your mouse over sport, you hover over that arrow, and you can see that it says athletes is nothing, meaning it failed to resize an array for athletes. So we know that, all right, this should give you a sense that there was something wrong with your allocation of memory code. And at this point in time, my suggestion to you is do not continue writing your code until you fix this particular problem. And hopefully you know how to fix it, and hopefully you know not to just leave it as is, because if this is where your program crashes, then you will lose all the correctness code going forward. All right, so let's take a look at our code here again. And we all know that, well, it's because we didn't actually put our read'em arrays in the right places. Now, if you think about this, where did we actually go wrong? Well, hopefully you remember that when we resize arrays, you do not start with the for loop. You need to start with the resize. So I'm going to take this code and I'm going to put it in here instead to go start off with resizing the sports to how many teams there are. Then inside that, we need to say for every single sport, resize the athletes to how many athletes there are for every team. And then afterwards, we need to resize the number of medals for every single athlete, meaning this for loop here for the medals is absolutely not necessary. All right, so I'm going to take those away and let's try again. Let's run again. Initialize, how many teams? Make it 3 teams, 2 athletes. Input my data. Is there negative marking in Informatics 1A? ST Mashlang is asking. No, there isn't negative marking, but what there is that if your program doesn't work after, so if your program crashes after a certain point, then the error that causes the crash to happen, from that point onwards, you will lose marks for correctness. And even if you write your code on paper, we will look to see that does your program actually crash in that sense. All right, so what is the name of teams for team 1? So I go A, and then, oh, look, you see, previously my program actually crashed at this point.